Hello. Nice to see you all again. Thanks for joining us for this, we'll call it a crisis crash course, I suppose, for those of you interested in crisis committees and those of you participating in crisis committees here in the very near future. We're going to go ahead and just quickly go around, and if we know you, you don't have to introduce yourself, but if you're new, then you can go ahead and introduce yourself. You all know me. Most of you know me. I'm Olivia. I'll be your instructor for today. We just saw each other last week, so maybe just share like one good thing that happened to you this last week and like one thing that you're looking forward to for this week. And then we'll get started and we'll jump right into talking about crisis committees. So who wants to start? Okay, I'll start and then I'll just pick somebody to go next. So one good thing that happened to me last week. I was able to change my course schedule around, so now I only actually attend 2 classes instead of 3, and I'm very excited about that prospect of all of the free time that I now have in my life. So I'm excited. And one thing I'm looking forward to this week is all of the sunshiny days here in New England. It's been very nice to see the sun, so that's exciting for me. Sophia, how about you go next?
Something good that happened last week was I had a pretty relaxing weekend, and something I'm looking forward to is I have a debate competition at UPenn this weekend.
Awesome, super exciting. Good luck.
Thanks.
Avery, you're up.
Yeah, sorry, I'm a little sick. But yeah, something that's exciting that happened last week is um I don't know, like I got good like math test score. So yeah.
Awesome. And what's one thing you're looking forward to for this week?
Oh yeah, sorry. I guess submitting my position papers.
Awesome. Sounds good. Scarlett, you're up.
Okay, so something good that happened this week is I walked my dog finally because the weather was bad for the few last days, so it was nice to get out. And then something I'm looking forward to, um, I don't know, I just guess like the same thing as you said, just like good weather, like moving forward.
Yeah. Awesome. And Sherwin, hello.
Hi, I'm here on the courtesy of Avery, but something good happened last week. Um, Nothing really happened. It was more of a relaxing week to get me prepared for this next few weeks, which are going to be like kind of hectic. But something I looked forward to is the Lunar New Year festival at school, and like I'm helping around with that, so we're hoping to have a good turnout and everything.
Awesome. That sounds great. And Sherwin, can you just let me know how much MUN experience you have um in terms of like crisis committees versus like regular committees, or if this is your first time going to a MUN conference, just
I went to one last year. It was for like underrepresented people. So
okay.
I haven't been to a crisis committee yet, but yeah, Minion has been keeping me up to date about some stuff.
Okay, perfect. That sounds good. Thank you so much for letting me know. None of you have done crisis, right? Scarlett, you've never done crisis. Okay.
Wait, I've done specialized, but I don't think that counts.
Were you in a crisis committee?
It was crisis
Where
because it was back rooms.
there was back rooms?
But it was like specialized, but they made it into a crisis committee because they were like, we want to switch it up.
Okay, so you have a little bit of experience then. Perfect. So crisis is a lot different than your General Assembly, your ECOSOC, and your regional body committees. And because of this, it's important that you understand just what it is and how they're set up first and foremost. They can seem very chaotic, very crisisy. If you were just kind of sitting in the middle of a crisis committee, it can feel disillusioning because you really don't know what's going on. You are just kind of being informed of things happening as they happen, and then you have to adapt to them. There's not really a structure or a formal solution like a regular committee. They can conclude with coups, assassinations, and even like cyber attacks or something just crazy like building a community on Mars. I've had crisis committees end with like aliens and just like crazy absurd things. So let's first talk about what a crisis committee is. They're very fast paced and rather normally, and it seems like Avery and Sherwin, you are representing a country. Sometimes instead of representing a country, you're actually representing a character, like a person. And that can range from an ambassador to the Pope to a journalist and or doctor, and these can generally be real or fictional, depending on the committee. And so each delegate's goal is to assert their country or character's viewpoint and end the conference, this is the goal, having amassed the most social, political, or economic power. And this is indicated by how much of their back room comes in room. And we'll get into like what exactly that means. Crisis is comprised of two main forums, like two main kind of places the crisis committee is taking place. In room, right? Like in the room where everybody is sitting. So this is referring to the delegates' performance inside of committee. Speeches, collaboration with other delegates, directive writing. Directives, just as a quick quip, are basically the same thing as working papers. They're just like very, very fast. So anytime you write a directive, you're just kind of getting a majority vote and passing it through, and like it takes place. And they're fairly informal. Most of the time, anybody can write a directive. You don't need like sponsorships or anything like that. You can just literally write something on a piece of paper and hand it in. And they're meant to just get action through the committee. In room operates very similar to a regular committee. You will have a chair, there will be motions, delegates will cycle through moderated caucuses and unmoderated caucuses to debate all possible solutions to the topic. However, in the middle of all of that is what's happening out of the room or in the back room. And this is what makes it different from all of the other committees. You will write what is called crisis notes. And these are delivered to crisis staffers, whom you will probably never see unless they are coming in to storm your committee and like introduce something that's happened or like a new revelation. And delegates in this unique aspect of this committee can create their own storyline to establish connections with figures in the committee and take advantage of loopholes or what is called a cult that will then allow you to gain power in room, because those sorts of backroom crisis notes that you're writing, the crisis staffers will use them to create new scenarios for the committee. And so an example of that would be like, we can use Emma's example from the past Harvard Model UN conference, just kind of, I know that she talked a little bit about like, her topic was like Barbie world, and so everybody was a different Barbie. And so she had to come up with like a plan for her like role and like her particular Barbie. And the goal is not to share your crisis notes and not to share like what your crisis arc is. Basically, you kind of want to set up like where you want to start, where you want like the middle point of like your crisis, like what you want your big moment to be, and then like how do you want to end like your like crisis development. So she decided on like communist Barbie, and like she was not communist Barbie, she was chef Barbie. But in the back room for all of her crisis notes, she was turning all of the Kens into communists with like red 40 in the food that she was making. But nobody knew this, right? This was all happening because she was like writing her notes and like handing them to the backroom staffers. And so when all of like when like Vladimir Kennan came into the room, like this was like communist Ken, nobody knew how he got there, who made him come in, but it was Emma's note that got him there. Does that make sense? So like your backroom notes create real developments in committee, and so the more developments that come out of your notes mean that you have the power in the committee, and that like the crisis staffers really like the direction that you're going. Harvard crisis committees tend to give you feedback. They'll be like, oh, like we really like this idea, but we think you should do this instead. And they'll give you tips. Not all of the not all of the conferences do that. Yale doesn't, and I'm not sure if MUN does, but you'll be able to tell fairly quickly. You should absolutely take their tips if they give you tips, because they're guiding you on what they want to see. In a crisis committee, okay, let me pause. Does anybody have any questions about any of that? It is very confusing at first, but hopefully like that makes sense. We're gonna also like run through a couple examples at the end, so like you can kind of get an idea of like how this will actually work. Any questions? Okay. In a crisis committee, delegates have two primary types of documents. Directives. They're very much like working papers and draft resolutions. They have sponsors, they have signatories, they have clauses normally. Sometimes if they're like, oh, there's an emergency and we're being bombed, we need a directive, it's like they don't have all of that. It's just like you just write something on a piece of paper and you just turn it in. But for most scenarios, you'll have kind of a more formal approach to them. Just a reminder, sponsors are those that have directly contributed to the document. Those are your authors. Signatories are those who are interested in seeing the document presented for voting. They don't necessarily have to support it. They just want to argue it sometimes. And directives are written in room. They're written in the room. They have operative clauses. They don't have preambulatory clauses. So no preambulatory clauses are necessary for crisis writing, because the background of the problem is like often very confusing and like doesn't make sense for like the directive. So just describe a solution to the issue. You don't have to like describe the issue itself. That makes sense. Then the second primary type of document is a crisis note. These are multifaceted notes that drive the direction of committee. Do not tell other delegates what your crisis notes are. And if other delegates tell you what theirs are, absolutely use that to your advantage and sabotage their plans, because that is the whole point. So if you can figure out what other people are doing, be sneaky and try to sabotage. And the more friends you make, and like the more people that you can get like on your side, the better that looks for you in committee, especially if you're kind of manipulating the back room a little bit to kind of mess with their plans. So that's always good. Make friends, not enemies, in committee, and then turn on your friends in the back room. Each delegate will create their own. Oh, Scarlett, yes.
Wait, you said like where they tell you like their plan, but like how do you know they're not like lying? Like how do you know they're
They
not doing that just
absolutely could be.
okay,
So
so
you're
like
gonna have to take a risk.
okay, because like what if they like try to what if they like end up making you do something that like you didn't want to do?
Yeah, so that's a risk you're gonna have to take. If you think they're being sincere, right, then like maybe listen to them. Or
Mhm.
if you don't even want to worry about that, you can just stick to your own crisis arc and just kind of go with what you're doing and just try to mess with them without listening to what they said.
Okay, thank you.
Avery.
Yeah, so I'm a little confused.
Mhm.
But when we write our like crisis notes, that influences what happens in the back room, right? Um,
And in committee.
and in committee. So,
Mhm.
like, when like I just don't get so we can directly like influence what happens to like the other countries or whatever with the crisis notes.
Yeah.
So it's basically we're just saying like what are we even saying? We're just saying what happens. Like we're just making a story up.
So basically, yeah. So each delegate or country will create their own storyline or crisis arc as they attempt to accumulate as many resources and like money and power as possible. You can address these crisis notes to another character that is not represented by a person in that committee room that can offer you a path to acquire resources. So, for example, if I am I don't know, senator or something, if I'm a senator and I'm in a crisis committee, I might direct one of my crisis notes to my really close friend at IBM or like the like World Bank or something to like launder me money. Like or just something crazy, right? And so you're gonna be like addressing your crisis notes to an actual person, and then you can keep referring back to this person. A really good technique is to direct a crisis note to maybe like a secretary who can like do everything for you. Or like your wife who's like the prime minister or something, right? Like something that's like kind of wild and a little niche, but you can also like each note can be directed to like somebody else, but it can be good to keep it consistent. Um, the secretary is a good one because you can be like, "Hey, secretary, can you get me this or can you contact this person or can you do this or do that?" Um, does that make sense?
Yeah. Wait, so but as a whole, like we're representing the Russian Federation, right? A whole country. Like,
Mhm.
can we still address it to like our secretary or whatever? Or would we like what
Yeah.
would okay.
You could
Okay.
also just be like you could address it to because you're like a representative, right? Like as Russia, you are just like a representative. You also there's a chance they didn't give you characters for that.
I don't think so. I'm not like completely sure, but when I was looking in my background guide, it didn't look like they assigned characters there on like the
Yeah, all
MUN
they gave us
website.
was Russian Federation, and that was always written on there.
There's a chance that when you get into committee, you'll be actually given like characters from the Russian Federation. Like it might be like the director of blank 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 of like Russia, or like the like I don't know Putin, like you know like a president of like this country. Like there's a chance that you'll be kind of given people um when you get into the committee. Um,
Okay, thank you.
part of what makes the crisis. Oh yeah, Sophia, go ahead.
So, you said like if we participate in a crisis committee, we should try to sabotage other people's plans. So, how would we do that? Like, could you give some examples?
Yeah, let's say you overhear a group like the groups that form like the social groups and committees are generally called cults, and it's like people that work together. And you don't want other cults to figure out what your cult is doing, but then you can also conspire against your cult and all the cults in the back room, and just like nobody really knows what you're doing, and it's just kind of like, think of it as like high school catty behavior on steroids. Like all of the mean girls just like all trying to just sabotage each other. So an example of that would be you're working with you're like a prime minister, and you're working with the Department of Agriculture and the like national doctor person, and I don't know, a nun, something random. And so that's who like your cult is. And so together, collectively, in committee, you're writing directives, right? Like this is all happening in the committee. You're writing directives to like help, let's say, a infestation of bugs is ruining the crops, people are starving, there's a famine, something like that. And so like this group of people that you're working with in committee is trying to do what you do in regular committees. You're writing directives, you're trying to solve the problem. So let's say the farmers and like the doctors and like everybody agrees that like spraying pesticides is going to be a really good thing. So let's say you spray pesticides all over. What you can do is in your backroom crisis notes is you can say like maybe the pesticides didn't work, or maybe the pesticides only worked for like excuse me, certain crops. And sneakily you're working with, I don't know, like the mafia or something. Like as the prime minister, you're like working with somebody else. And your goal is to make sure that like the crops don't grow or just something like really abstract, but like you're playing multiple different teams to try to get your crisis arc into committee. Does that make sense? So you're gonna have like a group of people that you're talking to and working with in committee. You might have a group that you like created in the back room, or even that you're like secretly working with and passing notes with to try to sabotage other people in your committee. And then you also just like want to make sure that your own character slash country crisis arc has an ability to like appear in the committee. And so the best way to do that is to just be super outlandish. Like, don't like go be killing everybody off in your committee, but you can like suggest that maybe somebody's like laundering money and like they should be arrested. And like you like I've been in committees where they come in and literally like put bags over like people's heads and like carry them out of the room, and then they like get released like a couple minutes later back into the committee. But like it's stuff like that that makes the crisis fun. And so the more like things you can give the crisis delegates to do, because they absolutely love this stuff, like the better it is for them. So like storming the Capitol, like, or like, I don't know. I kind of think it's like really funny what's happening in Paris right now, where like all the farmers are dumping like dirt in the middle of the roads and like making farms out of their highways. Like that sounds like a crisis note to me. Like the the farmers are protesting in Paris, and so like maybe as the prime minister, like you are supposed to have the farmers' interest in mind, like in heart, but you don't, and so like now the farmers are mad at you, and like blah 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 blah. So like that, like honestly, like real life situation sounds like a crisis committee to me. Um, so it can be confusing, but does that make sense? Like how you kind of have like multiple different goals and priorities and like teams all happening. Let's say you have alliances with lots of different people, some of which are actual and some of which are not. And it's up to you to make sure that you don't let people know which ones are true and which ones aren't. You want to seem like you have, like, everybody can like trust you. You want to be trustworthy so that they like don't start doing mean stuff to you. Okay. part of what makes these crisis committees so quick is that the simultaneous nature of both directive writing and giving speeches, as well as back room writing and like interruptions, make everything just go really, really quick. While moderated caucuses are happening, delegates write solutions to the issues and generally circulate the directives while people are talking. So you're going to want to be paying attention to like lots of different things happening. There's a chance that you'll see a directive and not even read it and just like sign it or pass it along. If the chair sees this happening a lot, they'll take advantage of that. And like, if you pass a directive, let's say you pass a directive because you're getting bombed and you give like the military complete total control or something, the crisis director can say, okay, well, you gave the military complete total control and now there's a coup or just something like that. Does that make sense? So like you want to make sure that you're actually paying attention to like what the directives say. And if something happens where you pass a directive like that, you can pass another one that says like, okay, this ends like the military's complete control of that because we don't need that happening. So as you craft your storyline, keep in mind a checkpoint for each night or each committee of the conference is crucial. So let's go through what those kind of checkpoints of your storyline should be to keep you on track to make sure that your crisis arc has a good trajectory. The aim of your first day of committee is to establish a foundation for the chaos that you want to create later in the conference. Your first notes should collect resources, physical armies, money, an outlet to spread propaganda, needed connections for funding or later events. Like establish the resources that you need to carry out the rest of your plans. Then, over the next couple of committee sessions, you should move toward the top of your arc, right? The peak thing that's going to happen. Something intriguing enough that the crisis staff will want to bring it into the room, but not so dramatic that you've reached your like big moment. And then the day before the conference ends, crisis notes should build and execute the big moment or peak of your storyline, the most impactful element of your arc that is so compelling that it demands a response from the other delegates. Something that could look like would be a blackout in Los Angeles that forced everyone to work in room with the lights off until power could be restored to the city, right? Like you can make that happen where like they just shut all the lights off and you're like having to work in the dark. Your last notes should culminate the resources and events that you have caused over the weekend to attain your end goal. So basically building on everything that you've built on over the weekend in your crisis notes, that's when you want to like end with like your big moment. There are also things called joint person directives. These notes draw from the resources of 2 or more delegates to increase the likelihood of executing a difficult event. If you find someone in the committee that you really trust and really want to work with, then you can do this. It's basically like you both write crisis notes, but then your crisis notes are kind of combined together to execute a big event. Think of like if the military works with the be like the military's working with like all the physicians or something, and then they like execute some sort of like big event. They're like they release a virus, like or something. I don't know. Proceed with caution because delegates will write additional crisis notes to take advantage of loopholes. and you accumulate more power than the co-authors. That can be you, but don't let that happen to you. If your storyline is original and established enough, the crisis staff will bring elements of it in room and share them as crisis updates. Without revealing the crisis arc that caused the situation, delegates will have to respond impromptu to the problems that are generated out room. That's your goal. Your goal is to get as much of your backroom stuff brought in room as possible. So just be creative and find loopholes in your directives, but always build on your own character crisis arc. Okay, let's review quickly. I'm just going to quickly go over this one more time, just the structure and layout of this, so that way everybody kind of understands. Okay, crisis committees have a front room and a back room. The front room is the committee room itself. It's like the physical location that all of the delegates are sitting in. Instead of writing resolutions, the front room will pass directives. Directives use the resources that the committee controls to create military action, policy proposals, press releases, and more. Directives passed in the front room tell the back room what happened. The back room is the physical location where the crisis director and assistant chairs respond to notes and directives. Generally, there's two crisis directors. There's two directors. There's a crisis director and a committee director. So the crisis director is the one responding to your notes, and the committee director is the one leading your committee. Okay. I think that is most of the general structure of stuff. I want to quickly go through the crisis cycle with you, just to give you an idea of what this means. Each crisis cycle will have a different focus, but it has the same format as a crisis break. And then there's debate, and then there's a directive. So let's see. Can you else see this? Okay. So, crisis break. Are you the sponsor? If you are the sponsor of a directive, then you're going to pass the directive around to gather signatories. This generally happens during debate. Does your directive have enough signatories? If yes, you're going to pass it up to the chair. Does the chair want them to merge? If no, then they'll vote, they'll introduce directives, for and against speeches, and then they'll vote on all the directives at the same time. If you are not the sponsor, you can start writing a directive, and then you can do the whole process again. So this is continuously happening while all of the other stuff is happening. So there's a lot to keep track of. You are going to want to have notebooks. You're going to want to have a nice little flow chart of how you want your weekend to go in terms of your own personal, crisis arc. Character arc. You are also going to want to have an idea of what sort of directives you want to be passed for committee. All the while trying to infiltrate other groups and figure out what their plans are and sabotage. Okay, so now that we've talked about kind of the formal ways in which crisis committees are updated, I want to talk a little bit more specifically about what a crisis break is. And crisis breaks happen in between debate, like formal debate. These are also like crisis updates, and they're the main way that the committee learns about like the state of the world, or like the state of like whatever world you guys are trying to, live in this scenario. The crisis director, so the back room, and the crisis staffers will enter the committee, and in normally some dramatic way will inform the committee about the events that have occurred outside of the committee doors. These often have short skits, and like they dress up, and it's a lot of fun. And then like your assistant like directors will generally act accordingly. They'll play like relevant characters of like whoever the note specifies is who they'll play generally. The primary purpose of this is to present new problems that the committee will have to solve. For example, if the committee was President Obama's cabinet, a possible crisis break would be North Korea testing a new nuclear weapon and then threatening to launch it at the US. Well, that would be very problematic for President Obama's cabinet. And then the committee would have to decide how to respond to that threat and keep Americans safe. Most of the time, these crisis breaks are the crisis staffers bringing ideas out of the committee's notes and just bringing them to life. So think of crisis breaks as little insights into what is happening in the rest of the notes, or sometimes it's just to shake committee up if things are like getting boring or like tedious. Okay, in this example of like the North Korea threat, your staffers might outline a diplomatic option, which could look like negotiating with North Korea to like not be doing that. An economic option, like imposing further sanctions or doing something of that same sort, or a military option, launching an attack on North Korean missile sites, sending like the Navy to go check on what's happening. Then the committee would then go into a debate. So after this crisis break, the committee then breaks into debate to talk about like the feasibility of those options, like benefits, consequences, and then pass a directive. Does that make sense? So it's like crisis breaks then turn into debate time about the crisis break. Near the end of a crisis break, when like the staff is still in there, generally delegates will have an opportunity to ask questions about the information. Don't be afraid to ask questions. It's a great opportunity to clarify anything. A few common questions are resources. What resources does the committee have available to solve the crisis? Money, military equipment, personnel, intelligence. In this example, it might be helpful to know what intelligence the CIA has on North Korea's missile sites and like if this is actually real. You can also ask about public awareness. Who else has heard this information? Like if it's public knowledge that North Korea is going to bomb the US, like that might be good to know. You might have to do some like damage control on like the US news stations or something. This is especially important in political committees, which yours is, where scandals are often coming to light. Like you do not want to be involved in a scandal in the public eye if you're like a big political or military figure. So then you want to figure out how like the committee might prevent the public from like finding that out if that is the case. And then finally, another like pretty big thing to ask questions about would be external responses. How have entities outside of the committee responded to this? If you're in like a cabinet situation, it might be good to ask how like other countries have responded, or ask about a potential alliance that you can have, or other potential actors. Like, okay, if North Korea starts doing this, do we see China doing this? Do we see, other countries, Iran, something like that, kind of continuing to deploy nuclear missiles at the US, because that could be really bad. Okay. Since crisis committees are relatively small, no, generally the rule of thumb is no more than 25. They're generally between like 10 and 15. You guys have 2 delegates per person. I'm gonna guess it's gonna be on the higher end. Closer to 20 or 30, maybe. You might have less than that. But you will have the chance to speak a lot more often than in your regular committees, especially if you were in a committee of like 130 people this last time. Like, you'll have an opportunity to talk. Try to speak as much as you can. The same rules for debate and just like general speaking still stand. It's the best way for other people to hear your ideas and to convince people to collaborate with you. And there's no pressure to make a perfect speech because they're generally much more impromptu than like regular speeches. However, the same rule applies to like all of that. So everything that we talked about for speeches during Harvard MUN still applies for speeches for crisis committees. Even though things are fast, you still want to make good speeches. Okay. When you propose a solution to a crisis break, that is a directive. They are handwritten and pretty short. They're 1 to 4 pages, and the chair will like specify. Normally, like, I say no more than like 3 because I don't want you to write that much and I don't want to read that much. And like I said, there's no preambulatory clauses. So it's basically just like a series of actions that the committee will take to respond to like the crisis. They should be very specific and very direct, outlining exactly what resources the committee will use and how those resources will be deployed. We're going to look at a sample for this like North Korea one, because I just think that that is helpful for everybody to just see. Give me a second. Everybody see this? Okay. Funny titles are always appreciated. Like, just, I don't know, come up with something funny. Then the sponsors, again, sponsors are the authors of the directive. Signatories are just people who like want to debate it. And then here are like 3 specific things that are going to happen. This is like the North Korea example. You want to normally write them as like a numbered list or bullets. They're literally just a list of actions that the committee want to take. Sometimes it's just one. Sometimes it's like 1 action. You can just submit it. So you can see that they're like very, very specific. Right? Does that make sense? Okay. Anybody have any questions on this? Okay. Anybody have any questions on anything that I've talked about so far? Okay. Just like regular committee, take notes during the crisis break so that you can start writing directives once the break has finished. Make sure that you jot down what is being said during your crisis break. You want to make sure that you get the details right. Sorry, making sure I'm not forgetting anything. Okay, there's something new that might be new to people. So everybody knows what a moderated caucus is. Everybody knows what an unmoderated caucus is. There is also something called a round robin. And a round robin is very unique to small committees. And it's where every delegate in the room makes a speech. They have a set topic and speaking time. So you would motion for a round robin with 30-second speaking time on the topic of military versus economic options of response. Something like that. And it's a way to hear everybody's opinion. However, you can ask if round robins are in order if your committee is like, if your chair doesn't specify, and if your committee's a little bigger, they might say no, because that would take up a lot of time. So like when you get into committee and like the chair is like, any questions before we open the floor for debate, you can always just be like, are we doing round robins, or like, is that like not happening? Okay. So we've talked about in committee, and we've talked a little bit about back room, but let's talk about note writing and what those should look like. Notes are the main component that separate crisis committees from traditional committees. You will receive generally 1 or 2 notepads at the start of your first session. You should use these to write plans, actions, questions, plots, whatever. Think of this as writing to your private secretary who is able to act on behalf of you outside of the committee. You should direct specific notes to specific people if that is in order. Like, feel free to do that. Your chair might also set a limit to the number of pages each of your crisis notes is, generally 2. So make them concise, make them very clear. You should have a specific like pad of notebook paper that is just for your crisis notes. Everything else should happen somewhere else. Because that's what you hand in. And you don't want them like reading like your rando notes that you were writing for like directives, because that like doesn't contribute to like committee. So what you'll do is take like your own personal notes on like something separate, and then write in your committee notebook pad very, very specific actionable items that could be put into place by the committee and by the crisis directors on behalf of you. Because these are periodically collected, you want to promote your own personal interest. You want to build alliances, use the power of your character or like country's portfolio, obtain new resources, and ultimately just become the top power. Notes build your importance and power in committee. The series of well-written notes will make you the spotlight of the committee. And the next crisis break and the crisis breaks should be about you and your plans. That's a good goal to have. When your notes are causing crisis breaks, that's when you know you've become influential in the decisions of your committee and when you know you're a top dog. It is important to keep in mind over the course of the weekend that you'll be writing dozens of notes. So your response might ask you a lot of questions about your plans, like how should I pay for this, or like what do you want to do next? This is normal. Like if they're responding to you and they're like asking you like how to pay or like what to do next, and you are expected to answer all of these questions. So if they ask you questions, you should respond, and you should do so in a way that like makes logical sense. Okay, I want you to remember the 3 R's. It's one way to make your notes clear and concise, and in a way that you don't want the crisis staffers to have to like decipher what the heck your crisis note means. So those 3 R's are resources, request, and reasoning. Over the course of the committee, you will likely acquire several important resources, hopefully in the very first committee session when you request those resources. Additionally, you will have dozens of other delegates in your committee who all have their own resources. So this statement helps distinguish your note from all of the rest. All you need to do is state a reminder of what you already have. This does not need to cover everything. It should, however, be relevant to the next part of your note. Some examples would be like, I would like to use my army of socialist university students. I was thinking I should sell some of the bananas on my banana farm, right? Like if you're like a farmer and you have decided that you farm bananas, like just make it clear to the crisis directors that like you know what you have, and then they can also know what you have, and then I'll really go back and hunt for what you have. Or remember my friend James, the husband of the president? We met in college. Like I need him to do me a favor, just something like that. And you like these don't necessarily have to be things that you've asked for. You can just be making something up to show them that you have resources. Does that make sense? Kind of. You can just like write in your crisis notes. Oh, remember my secret vault of like AK-47s that I had stashed? Like I'm gonna hand them out to the militia members. Like something like that. Like you don't have to, this can just be like a new development that you come up with that you like write in your crisis notes. Does that make sense? Is that good? Okay. So then the next part, right? That's resources. Now you have your request. This is to like go through what you want to do next. You can keep them small for the most part. They're like small requests are generally more likely to be granted. Ask for anything, which is an extension of your current resources. You can move your resources. You can turn them into something new. You can upgrade them. There is no shortage of ways to use a resource. As long as your request is simple and clear, it will most likely be accepted. Something just to like build on those other examples. Move the army of socialist university students along with their supplies to the capital of France. Sell the bananas and begin to buy catapults and slingshots, right? Like just, you can turn your resources into something totally different. Ask my friend James if he wants to be the governor of Florida. Like I believe this role will suit him well. Like you can like just something totally different. Keeping in mind that resources can be social, they can be economic, or they can be political. Any questions on that? Okay, then the third R, he remembers what that is. What's the first R?
Resource.
What's the second R? Yep, request. I saw you mouth that, Avery. What's the third R? Reasoning. This is the most important part. It gives a justification for what the heck you're asking for and gives the chairs more insight into your ultimate strategy. When the chairs have this information and they understand your motivations, they can respond to your notes more comprehensively. So just give a short explanation as to why this request aligns with your like agenda or your plan. So keeping along the same lines of like socialist university students, once the army of socialist university students is in the capital, we can begin to protest the horrid capitalist policies of the government. Like here we can demonstrate and soon turn this tyranny into a utopia or something like that. Does that make sense? Just like a quick little one-liner to explain that. Okay, Avery.
Yeah. So for our resource gathering as like a country within like I don't know if the topic's serious. I just feel like it's a little more formal than like some of the others I've heard about. How like realistic should our resource gathering be?
Well, you can assume that you have all of the resources of Russia, but
Okay.
also assume that you can acquire resources by storming into other people's countries.
Okay. Okay, that
Right?
makes sense.
So then, depending on how you want to play that, you could do a multitude of things.
Okay.
Sure one.
And then to build off of him, so basically, like when you say that we can like storm other people's, are they gonna like? Is it like a chance thing? Like either we succeed or not? Is it just when we storm them and like get their resources, like we are guaranteed to receive their resources?
Depends on the chairs. Normally, if you can like be pretty confident in your like, you can say like, oh, we won because like there was like they didn't know we were coming and like we blitzkrieg them and like whatever. Like, um, you can kind of make up a story for yourselves, like saying that you won because of like other circumstances. Um, or like you it was winter and somebody tried to invade you and then they lost and then you took all of their resources because they were like in your country. like you something like that. Does that make sense?
Yeah, so
Um,
we can like sort of make
yeah,
up situations within
yeah,
reason, but
yeah,
okay.
exactly. Yeah. You also can like draw graphs. Like you can draw graphs or charts. Like if you're like, this is like before now and now on like a x-axis and then you have a y-axis, you can be like Russia's president approval rating. You can like like to 100%, you can like make it go up or you can like make it go down. You know what I'm saying? Like you can like draw graphs and be like, this is like what's happening.
Okay.
Um, you also can draw pictures. You also can draw maps. You also can make a list. Like if you have a plan for a coup, you can say like, or if you have a plan to invade, like let's say you're invading, I don't know, China. If Russia invades China, then you need like a plan and like a list, and you can lay that out in your crisis notes for them to like look at and read.
And then in these crisis notes, like, let's see, can I just one-sidedly make alliances and say, like, with your example, I make an alliance with China, and then they just happen to give me like so much money. Or like another example is let's say I'm planning on invading a country right now and I need materials and like ammunition and whatnot. And then I suddenly just increase tax rate and then just give X amount of money. Are those two like realistic scenarios, or is it just too far out?
No, that's yeah, no. That's things that could definitely happen. I also will just say that it depends on the conference. Because this is NIMUN and not Harvard MUN, NIMUN might reply differently to you for that, but they normally, if they don't accept your like line of thinking, they'll justify it and they'll say, oh, you didn't tell us this, or like you needed to
Okay.
like do this, and then you can update like your next note accordingly to like what they've said.
Okay.
Or even if it's just answering a couple of their questions and then they like do it in the next round of like crisis breaks.
Thank
Um, so let's spend the next 30 minutes talking through some examples and the specifics that you both will encounter this weekend. While I bring those documents up, can or anybody who has questions can feel free to ask them about anything that we've talked about. Does anybody have any questions? No? Okay. So you guys have both read background guide and the topic abstract, right? Avery and Sherwin, good? Yep. Okay. Do you have any specific questions about that you want to talk about? Or should we just jump right into like talking about some examples and crisis arc character arc?
Um, yeah, for like the point of view, we're talking about position paper, right?
Mhm.
Yeah. So for the point of view, are we just writing representing Russia?
For now,
And
if
then
it didn't give you characters, yeah.
yeah, so like we kind of wrote an outline for ours right now. So first we have like explaining like our view based on our own research. And then the second paragraph is just like our side on that, like the Civil War and whatnot, and then like what we want to do. Is that like, and then obviously cover the three topics that were given to us. Does that
Yeah.
sound like good? Or is there anything else that we should look like? Because
No, that's pretty comprehensive. You don't want to be like talking about your like character crisis arcs in your position paper. Like just keep the position paper pretty vague.
or
Just make sure you're like in actual committee, you're answering these questions to consider, and in your position paper, you're answering those questions, like restoring rule of law and humanitarian aid, like economic devastation and state-sponsored reimbursements, and like preventing the spread of unrest beyond Albania. But it might be like your country might like Russia might not want to prevent the spread of unrest beyond Albania, right? They might want to fuel that unrest, in which case, like, you're gonna want to phrase it like you're trying to prevent the spread of unrest, but like sketchily. Like, I'll prevent the spread of unrest by